She buried 2 sons. Her eldest daughter had been banished by her husband, but her hope rested on the last 2, Anne Boleyn and George Boleyn. Then the king came for them too. In May 1536, both Anne and George were arrested on the same day. The charges that would destroy them both? Incest with each other. And there's one cruel detail history rarely mentions. Her husband, Thomas Boleyn, sat on the panel of judges that condemned them. He said nothing, not once. When Anne was taken to the Tower, she cried out for her mother. "O my mother, thou wilt die with sorrow." She was right. Elizabeth Boleyn died less than 2 years later, heartbroken, alone. She gave birth to 5 children. No one was at her bedside when she died. Was she a helpless mother, swept along by forces she couldn't control? Why didn't she make her husband fight for their children? And why does history remember Anne in endless detail, but almost erase the woman Anne cried out for in the Tower? That silence is what this story is really about.
Welcome back to History Untold. I'm Alex, and together we'll uncover the hidden secrets of the past. If these untold stories speak to you, hit the like button and join our family. Let's step into the past together. Chapter 1. The Girl the Howard Family Built. Around 1480, in one of the most powerful noble households in England, a girl was born. Her name was Elizabeth Howard. Her father was Sir Thomas Howard, later the 2nd Duke of Norfolk. Her mother was Elizabeth Tilney, and her grandfather, Sir John Howard, had just been made the 1st Duke of Norfolk by King Richard III himself in 1483, 2 years before everything collapsed. In 1485, Richard III was killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field. The man who replaced him, Henry VII, was Tudor, careful, and watching every old noble family for signs of loyalty or treachery. The Howards had fought for Richard. They paid for it. Elizabeth's father was stripped of his title, attainted, and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Elizabeth was around 5 years old. She would not have understood the politics, but a 5-year-old in a household where the patriarch is taken away learns something no tutor can teach, that power is not permanent, and that survival requires a different kind of intelligence. Her father eventually won back royal favor, fighting for Henry VII at Flodden in 1513. He got the dukedom back. The family recovered. That is what the Howards did. They always recovered. As a young noblewoman, Elizabeth entered royal court service, first in the household of Elizabeth of York, wife of Henry VII. This was not an honorary position. She was a working lady-in-waiting in a Tudor court, learning every current and undercurrent of royal life. Around 1495, the poet John Skelton dedicated a poem directly to her, "To My Lady Elizabeth Howard." It survives. It speaks to the impression she made before her marriage, before her children, before any of what came next. She was around 15. She had no idea what that court was going to ask of her family.
Chapter 2. A Marriage Built on Ambition and What It Cost Her. Around 1498, Elizabeth Howard married Thomas Boleyn. He was the son of Sir William Boleyn, educated, fluent in French, politically sharp, and deeply ambitious. On paper, it was a useful match, but it was not an equal one. The Howards, despite their recent fall, still carried one of the oldest and most powerful noble names in England. The Boleyns, by contrast, were rising, wealthy, clever, well-placed, but not yet at the same level. For Thomas, marrying a Howard daughter was a leap upward. For the Howards, still rebuilding their position after Bosworth, it was a practical alliance rather than a grand one. It tells you something about the moment they were in. Thomas knew exactly what he was doing, and Elizabeth, young, well-connected, and already noted for her beauty, was part of that calculation. She was admired at court, poised, graceful, and striking enough to be remembered in writing. Elizabeth was pregnant many times in the early years of her marriage. The records stay silent on the exact number, but one detail breaks through. In July 1536, Thomas Boleyn wrote to Thomas Cromwell claiming his wife had given him a child every year. Every year. At least 5 pregnancies are documented. 2 sons, Thomas, born 1496, and Henry, known as Hal, born around 1500, both died in the sweating sickness outbreak of 1506. The sweating sickness moved like a verdict. A person was healthy at breakfast and dead by nightfall. It was not slow. It gave no time to prepare, no time to say what needed saying. Elizabeth buried both boys before either of them reached adulthood. 3 children survived: Mary, George, Anne. And at Hever Castle in Kent, the family's country home, Elizabeth raised all 3 herself. According to historian Alison Weir, she personally taught them music, singing, dancing, embroidery, poetry, household management, arithmetic, grammar, history, reading, and French. She was not a distant figure behind a closed door. She was the education. She was the beginning of everything those children became. But here is what the record sits beside without comment. While Elizabeth was teaching her children to read and play instruments at Hever, Thomas Boleyn was building his career at court, charming, networking, and climbing. And the woman he had left at Hever with the children and the grief was the same woman who years later history would barely think to name. Chapter 3. The French Court and the Daughter Who Changed Everything. In 1513, Anne Boleyn was sent abroad. She was somewhere between 12 and 14 years old. Historians still debate the exact birth year. And she was dispatched first to the court of Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands, then to the French court of Queen Claude, wife of King Francis I. This was Thomas's ambition at work. But Elizabeth was not absent from this world. Between 1518 and 1521, she was in France herself, accompanying Thomas during his years as English ambassador to the Valois court. Both her daughters were in that world at the same time. And what was happening to Mary there? King Francis I, recalled 15 years later by the papal nuncio in France, referred to Mary Boleyn using language that has no place in polite conversation. He called her his English mare. He later described her as a great whore. Historian M.L. Bruce documented that both Thomas and Elizabeth developed feelings of dislike toward their eldest daughter because of this. Think about that for a moment. A mother watching her eldest daughter become a public scandal in a foreign court, unable to change it, unable to undo it, filing the feeling away somewhere that doesn't show. Anne was different. Anne came back to England in 1522, parrying herself like the French court had poured something into her. Composed, sharp, musical, fluent. Everything Elizabeth had started at Hever, France had completed. Around 1520, the family arranged Mary's marriage to William Carey, a respected courtier. It managed the damage publicly. But not long after the wedding, Mary became the mistress of Henry VIII, discreetly, without fanfare, without the title of official royal mistress, because that position did not formally exist in England. One daughter had been Francis I's mistress and now belonged to King Henry VIII. Another was quietly rising, becoming the most talked-about woman at the English court. The family held its shape and said nothing. Survival demanded it. Chapter 4. The Chaperone. Around 1525, Henry VIII decided he was in love with Anne Boleyn. He began writing letters,
17 of them survive today, held in the Vatican Library, removed to Rome by a spy during the years of the divorce crisis and never returned. In those letters, Henry does not sound like a king. He sounds like a man in the grip of something he cannot reason his way out of. He calls Anne his sweetheart. He begs for a definitive answer. He counts the days between their meetings. Anne did not become his mistress. Every other woman Henry had pursued had yielded. Anne held the line. And Elizabeth Boleyn became her daughter's chaperone at court. This is historically documented. According to Karen Lindsay's Divorced, Beheaded, Survived, Elizabeth accompanied Anne to court specifically because Anne was trying to avoid a sexual relationship with the king. A chaperone in Tudor England was not a formality. It was a physical presence. It was the difference between a moment that could happen and one that could not. Elizabeth was walking beside her daughter through the most dangerous courtship in England. Every day, through every courtly event, in every corridor, with full knowledge of what Henry was and what he wanted. She had served in his court for years. She had watched him as a young king married to Catherine of Aragon. She had watched him take her own eldest daughter as a mistress without consequence. Now the same man was circling Anne, and Elizabeth stood between them, documented, present. In 1529, Cardinal Wolsey, who had dominated English politics for 2 decades and who had become the Boleyns' great political enemy, fell from power. Thomas had helped engineer it. Elizabeth traveled with Anne to inspect York Place, Wolsey's magnificent London palace, after his fall. Thomas was elevated to Earl of Wiltshire. Elizabeth became the Countess of Wiltshire. They had arrived at the very peak of English noble society. It is the moment you'd expect triumph to feel clean, but Elizabeth had served at court long enough to know the higher you rise on a Tudor king's favor, the further there is to fall. She had just helped walk her daughter to the very top.
Chapter 5. A Queen, a Grandmother, and a Banished Daughter. In June 1533, Anne Boleyn was crowned Queen of England. 3 months later, on the 7th of September, she gave birth to a daughter at Greenwich Palace. The baby was healthy. She was named Elizabeth. It is recorded across multiple historical sources that the baby was likely named after her maternal grandmother, Elizabeth Howard. Whether she was named after both grandmothers or only one, the tradition that she carried Elizabeth Boleyn's name into the world is documented. Elizabeth remained in Anne's household throughout her time as queen. She was there, not ceremonially, as a working presence. The woman who had chaperoned Anne through a 6-year courtship was now part of the household of the queen she had helped create. And then, 1535, another daughter causes a fracture.
Mary Boleyn had secretly eloped with William Stafford, a common soldier, a match so far beneath her station that the family responded with immediate fury. Mary wrote a letter to Thomas Cromwell begging for support. In that letter, she said she would rather beg her bread with William Stafford than live like a queen with anyone else. It was honest, it was brave, and it was completely ignored.
Anne refused to receive her. Thomas was furious. Elizabeth sided with the family, and Mary was banished from court. A mother choosing the protocol of the court over her own daughter. In a world where any other choice might have been read as disloyalty to the queen, perhaps there was no real alternative. But Mary was gone. The family that Elizabeth had built at Hever, one child at a time, was beginning to fracture. And Mary's banishment, which felt like the worst thing that could happen, turned out to be the mercy. Because Mary was gone when May 1536 arrived.
Chapter 6. The month that broke everything. On the 1st of May 1536, Henry VIII stood up and left the May Day jousting tournament at Greenwich. No explanation, no farewell. He simply rode away. Anne was left in public,
surrounded by the court, with no understanding of what had just happened. The next morning, the 2nd of May, she was arrested. She was escorted by barge to the Tower of London. Her brother George was arrested the same day. The charges? Treason, adultery with 5 men, and incest with George. Historians Eric Ives and Retha Warnicki both concluded after decades of detailed research that the charges were fabricated. The real purpose was to clear a path for Henry to marry Jane Seymour. Anne had not produced a male heir. Henry had moved on, and the apparatus of Tudor justice existed to serve him. The 5 men named, Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton, Mark Smeaton, and George Boleyn, were tried and condemned. Now, the panel of peers who judged them. Elizabeth's husband, Thomas Boleyn, sat on that panel. Her brother, Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, presided over the proceedings. Neither man spoke in defense of the accused. Neither man raised a challenge. Neither man, in the documented record, said a single word to protect the people they shared blood with. The 5 men were beheaded on the 17th of May, 1536. George Boleyn died among them. Anne was executed 2 days later, on the 19th of May. Henry had granted her a French swordsman rather than the axe, considered a cleaner death. She was taken to the Tower Green. She spoke briefly, composedly, and said nothing against the king. But before all of this, when Anne was first taken to the Tower on the 2nd of May, a witness recorded what she said. She cried out, "O my mother, thou wilt die with sorrow." Not the king's name, not God, her mother. And where was Elizabeth in those weeks? There are no surviving letters, no petitions to Henry, no recorded visits to the Tower, no documented protest. In April 1536, just weeks before the arrests, a court official named Thomas Worley wrote to Lady Lisle in Calais, noting that the Countess of Wiltshire was sore diseased with the cough. She may already have been seriously ill. She may have been physically unable to act. She may have known that any action was not only futile but dangerous, that a wrong step could place her own name in Cromwell's files. A woman of her era had no standing in a treason proceeding. Her husband had not protected them. Her brother had presided over their deaths. There was nothing left to do. After the executions, Thomas and Elizabeth withdrew to Hever Castle, back to Kent, back to the house where she had taught her children to sing and read and hope. She never returned to a real role at court, and she never truly returned to Thomas either. Her husband, Thomas Boleyn, kept his titles and estates, but after the fall of his children, he was not the same man, she was not the same woman, and their marriage was not the same. By this time, many historians believe the marriage between him and Elizabeth Boleyn had already grown distant. She was unhappy with both her husband and her brother. Thomas Boleyn had sat in judgment of his own children and said nothing. Her brother, the Duke of Norfolk, had presided over the trial that sent them to the scaffold. And now she was expected to continue as wife and countess in the same house, at the same table, beside a man who had made that choice. She left.
Chapter 7. What Hever Held. By the time Elizabeth left Hever, she was moving toward London and toward her own family, the Howards, the people she had been born into before Thomas Boleyn had ever entered the picture. This is not a small detail. In Tudor England, a wife did not simply leave her husband's household. Property, title, social identity, all of it was bound to the marriage. For Elizabeth to spend her final months near Baynard's castle, away from Hever, close to her Howard relatives, that is a statement. Quiet, as everything about her life had been quiet, but deliberate. Her children were gone or scattered. The family she had built at Hever had been destroyed by the two men who were supposed to protect it. There was nothing left at Hever worth returning to. So she went back to where she had started. By the summer of 1537, Elizabeth was still known enough that Lady Lisle's agent sought her advice at court on a question of etiquette. She was present, still consulted, still someone people came to. She was staying in a house near Baynard's Castle, the London residence associated with the Abbot of Reading, when she died on the 3rd of April, 1538. What she died of is not recorded, but the cough that Thomas Worley had noted 2 years earlier had not left her, and it had been less than 2 years since her son and daughter were executed on charges that history has since declared false. The next record of Elizabeth Boleyn is a letter. Thomas Worley, the same court official who had noted her illness 2 years earlier, wrote to Lady Lisle in Calais on the 7th of April, 1538. He wrote, "My Lady of Wiltshire died on Wednesday last beside Baynard's Castle." That is the whole of it. 2 days later, a second letter arrived from John Hussey, another official, also writing to Lady Lisle. He described the funeral. Elizabeth's body was placed on a barge on the Thames. The barge was draped in black cloth with a white cross. Torches burned at each corner. 4 heraldic banners flew from the barge as it moved along the river toward Lambeth. She was buried in the Howard Chapel at St. Mary's Church, Lambeth, alone, with her own family, with the Howards, where she had started. A brass memorial plate was placed on the floor of the chapel, inscribed with the words, "Here lieth the Lady Elizabeth Howard, sometime Countess of Wiltshire." It no longer exists. The church was decommissioned in 1972. It is now the Garden Museum in Lambeth. Visitors walk through it, past the gift shop, through the courtyard, without knowing that the mother of Anne Boleyn and grandmother of Elizabeth I lies somewhere beneath them, in a location that is no longer precisely known. Her grave is unmarked. Its exact position is uncertain. She was around 57 years old.
Chapter 8. What she left behind. Elizabeth Boleyn died in April 1538. The granddaughter she had known as a baby, the small girl born at Greenwich on the 7th of September 1533, became Queen of England 20 years later, in November 1558. Elizabeth I ruled for 45 years. She oversaw an era of exploration, literature, and naval power that England had never seen before and would never quite replicate. She never married. She never named a successor until the end. And throughout those 45 years, she kept a ring. It is a small ring that opens to reveal 2 miniature portraits. One is of herself. The other is believed to be Anne Boleyn. She wore it privately, not on display, not in portraits, not in public ceremonies. It stayed on her finger until the day she died. It is now held at Chequers, the country residence of the British Prime Minister. She also kept Anne's personal emblem, the white falcon badge, and had it displayed in her palaces and carried in her funeral procession. Historian Tracy Borman has documented that Elizabeth I showed the greatest favor toward her maternal kin throughout her reign, restoring connections, rewarding allies of Anne Boleyn, and honoring the family that the events of May 1536 had tried to erase. She did not forget where she came from. And where she came from was Elizabeth Howard, the woman who began Anne's education at Hever, who taught her to read, to sing, to carry herself in a room full of dangerous people, who stood beside her as a chaperone through 6 years of the most treacherous courtship in England, who could not stop what happened in May 1536 because no one could, but who had already done everything that came before it. Thomas Boleyn survived his wife by 1 year. He died in 1539 and is buried at St. Peter's Church in Hever, alone, in the church of the family home where Elizabeth had raised his children. Mary Boleyn, banished, dismissed, called a whore by a king, outlived them all. She died in 1543, the only Boleyn sibling to die of natural causes, the daughter who chose love over protocol. The daughter Elizabeth could not protect from the family's judgment. The last surviving piece of Elizabeth Boleyn's documented voice is her will. It is practical. It lists bequests and instructions. Historian Claire Ridgway notes it offers no emotional insight, only the careful arrangements of a woman who knew her affairs needed to be in order. No words of grief, no farewell, nothing that tells us what she carried, like a woman who had already said everything that mattered and found there was no one left to hear it.
History remembers the women who fell dramatically. Anne Boleyn has films, novels, 400 years of fascination, and a ring on the finger of the queen she never lived to see crowned. Elizabeth I has the Golden Age, the Armada, and the portraits. Elizabeth Boleyn has a museum floor in Lambeth and an entry in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. But here is what the record shows, if you read it straight through without skipping the parts that don't fit the drama. She was born into one of England's most formidable families, at a moment when that family was about to lose everything. She watched them recover. She learned what recovery cost. She buried 2 infant sons before Thomas Boleyn had become anyone important at all. She served 2 queens before her own daughter became a 3rd. And when everything collapsed in May 1536, when the charges came and the trials moved and the axes fell, she was ill and powerless and surrounded by men who had already made their decisions. Her daughter's last recorded words were about her, not about Henry, not about God, about her mother. That tells you something. The barge on the Thames with the torches and the banners and the black cloth moved toward Lambeth on a morning in April 1538. The woman inside it had no monument waiting, no poem being composed, no letter of tribute being sent to a foreign court. Just the river, the torches, and the Howards receiving her back at the end. Here is something I want you to sit with. Thomas Boleyn sat in judgment of his own children and said nothing. He kept his titles, he kept Hever. He died in 1539 in his own bed, surrounded by everything he had preserved. Elizabeth lost 2 sons to illness, a daughter to banishment, and 2 children to the scaffold. She left her husband's house. She went back to her own family. And when she died, she made sure she would not spend eternity beside the man who had made that choice. That was the only decision left that was entirely hers, and she made it. So here is my question. Do you think Elizabeth Boleyn ever forgave him? Or did she spend her final months knowing exactly what she was doing when she chose Lambeth over Hever? Leave your answer below. I read every comment, and I think the answer you give says something about how much you believe a Tudor woman could truly choose anything at all. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe, hit the bell, and share it with one person who loves history. Every view gives these forgotten women back a little of the audience they were always owed. And if you want another story that history almost buried completely, the next video is right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.